Welcome to mini lecture number 2. This is the second of 3 mini lectures that provide a brief introduction to many of the concepts that we'll be studying in this class. This mini lecture is on the basic principles of microeconomics. The course that you're enrolled in is titled Basic Economics 1. So to this point you maybe didn't realize that you're enrolled in the microeconomics portion of our basic economics sequence. So I think it would be useful to start with a definition of what microeconomics is. And then I'll talk about some of the main principles of microeconomics. And these are principles that hopefully you will learn by the end of this course. A definition of microeconomics is that it is the study of households and firms, how they make decisions and interact in markets. The micro part of the economics is that we're focusing on households and firms, and we focus on specific markets like the market for bell peppers or the market for iPads. That's different than macroeconomics, which is the subject of the second course in this sequence, Basic Economics 2. And there, you're interested in much more aggregate phenomena. So how does these economy-wide things like inflation, unemployment, economic growth, how do they come about, and how are they related to the microeconomics? So in this course, we're much more focused on these individual decisions. So in this mini lecture, I'll talk about 7 of the principles of economics that are in chapter 1 of the textbook. And so these 7 are the ones that are relevant to this course. Question might be, well, how do you use this section or this chapter? So here I'm going to lay this out kind of as a roadmap to the main ideas that we'll be talking about in the course. But since these are the principles that I hope that you will learn through this course, I think a good idea is, as you're preparing for the final exam, is to come back and reread this section at the end of the course. And hopefully these will make much more sense to you then. So the first principle is that people face trade-offs. So maybe you've heard the phrase, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, that's kind of the same idea as there being trade-offs. All decisions involve a trade-off. You're listening to this mini lecture right now instead of being at the beach. Another example you could think of is, well, you have a friend, turns out to be a very wealthy friend, who comes to you and says, tomorrow I'm going out sailing in my new yacht. Do you want to come? It's free. Well, it seems that that's an example where there's a free lunch, so there's not really a trade-off there. But of course there's a trade-off. You're deciding to go on this yacht with a friend. You could be doing something else. You could be studying, or you could be working, or maybe spending time with less pretentious friends. In any situation, there are trade-offs. And part of thinking like an economist is being able to recognize what these trade-offs are. Principle 2 is this concept of opportunity cost. And opportunity cost will be an idea that's very important and we'll come back to repeatedly during this course. The definition of opportunity cost is it is the cost of something is what you give up to get it. So if I'm continuing with the yacht example, well, suppose that you call in sick at work in order to go on your friend's yacht. Then you've given up earnings that you could have made. You're now foregoing in order to spend the afternoon on a yacht. So that's the opportunity cost of going on a yacht. The key to sound decision making is recognizing what that opportunity cost is. And we will exploit this idea. The opportunity cost is the cost of something that you give up in order to get it. Principle number 3 is people think at the margin. So first we have to think about what's the definition of thinking at the margin. Well, a marginal change is a small incremental adjustment to a plan or action. Okay, so how does that matter for decision making? Well, a person who thinks at the margin should only take an action if the marginal benefit of that action is greater than the marginal cost. So as an example, we could think of the manager at the Westin Bonaventure Hotel in downtown LA. This is the largest hotel in LA. It has 1,474 rooms. On an average night, a room at the hotel costs about $250. Regardless of the number of guests that are staying in the hotel, there are always 1,474 rooms. Suppose one night that a guest walks in around midnight on a night when the hotel is maybe only 70% full. So there are hundreds of empty rooms in the hotel. And the guest walks in and offers to pay $50, which is much less than the going rate of $250. Should the hotel manager accept that offer? Well, what's the marginal benefit to the hotel from the offer? The marginal benefit here is there's an additional $50 that they would collect from this guest. But whether they should take that action or not depends on the marginal cost. Well, what's the marginal cost in this setting? Well, they don't have to build a new room. They have a lot of empty rooms sitting there, so the marginal cost really here is probably the housekeeping cost. Somebody has to come in and clean the room after the guest checks out. They have to clean the sheets, clean the towels. And so that marginal cost is likely to be less than $50. So in that case, then the hotel manager should accept that offer. And so that's an example of decision making at the margin. If the hotel manager had turned this down, because usually rooms rent for $250, then they haven't made a sound decision here. Another example you might think of is you're thinking about going to Taco Tuesday, and tacos are maybe $1. And so you go in and you eat your first taco, you pay $1, you enjoy that taco much more than the $1 that you've paid. And so maybe the second taco you're going to enjoy as well, and you'd be willing to pay an extra $1 for it. But at some point, the benefit you're getting from the additional taco is going to be less than that $1 that you pay. So imagine you're thinking of eating the 100th taco. And probably the benefit that you're getting out of that 100th taco is less than $1. At that point, you wouldn't buy and eat any more tacos. Principle 4 is that people respond to incentives. An incentive is something that induces people to act. In the last mini lecture, we talked about the market system and how markets are able to coordinate all of the actions of millions of people and firms. But how do they go about doing that? They go about doing that through incentives. Markets provide incentive through prices. So if the price of a good goes up, then the seller of that good would want to produce and sell more. But the buyer of the good wants to buy less of that good. And so the price is giving the incentives for people to buy the right amount and for firms to sell the right amount. A theme that we'll return to over and over again in this course is that government policies also provide incentives, and sometimes these are unintended. One example you might think of as an unintended example is helmet laws for motorcyclists. So it's well known that since helmet laws have come on, there have been far more motorcycle accidents than there were before. Driving around on Southern California freeways, you can kind of understand this. The wearing of helmets have given motorcyclists this feeling of safety, feeling that they're being more protected, and so they tend to take more chances. So this is an example of a response to a government policy that's given people an incentive to behave the opposite of the way the government policy was intending. This happens in lots of different types of insurance policies. Lately, there's been a lot of argument about Obamacare and government provision of health insurance. And health insurance is another example where by providing people insurance, it gives them incentives to behave in an unhealthy way. The book gives a great example of incentive pay in bus drivers But for me, I think about performance-based pay for professional athletes. I'm a San Francisco Giants fan. Baseball season is underway. And I realize that much of the pay for those athletes depend on how well they do, what type of hitting average they have, how many hits they collect, whether they make the All-Star team, whether they go and win the World Series. For me, that performance-based pay is great because it enhances how well the Giants do. Principle 5 is that trade can make everyone better off. Trade allows people or countries to specialize and consume and produce more. The concept of specialization is going to be a key part of what we discuss in this course. To think about how important specialization is, think about all the things you wouldn't have if there was no specialization. If there wasn't specialization, you would have to build your own house or apartment, you would have to grow, raise your own food, you'd have to educate yourself and your kids. And when you're doing all that, when would you have time to design and build an iPad? Principle 6 is that markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. What's the definition of a market economy? Well, it's one that allocates resources through the decentralized decisions of many firms and households as they interact in markets for goods and services. One key lesson from this course is that the best outcome usually occurs when prices and self-interest direct individuals and firms in markets. This is not to say that markets always are a good way to organize economic activity. And so we see that in Principle 7, which is that sometimes governments can improve market outcomes. Sometimes markets just don't work as efficiently as we would hope. Example that you can often think of is pollution. So a firm that's running a factory, deciding on how clean they want to run that factory, where are they going to dump the waste byproducts from their production process? Well, to a firm, it's cheapest just to maybe dump it in a river. And they don't take into account the fact that that pollution is exacting costs on many, many other people. And so markets fail to internalize that type of pollution. That's an example where a market's failing. And so we will see that in these kinds of scenarios, governments can help improve those market outcomes. And so this will also be a key principle for this course.